Welcome to the NT podcast, where faith meets reason. My name is Nemanja Jurišić, and today we are joined by Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, a leading New Testament scholar, author, and founder of the Christian Thinkers Society. Welcome.
Great to be with you. Really excited for our conversation.
Me too. Thank you for coming. Let me just read for our audience. Dr. Johnston is passionate about equipping believers to think deeply and clearly about their faith. And in this episode, we dive into one of the most important topics in all of Christianity, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. As a New Testament scholar, Johnston has published with Oxford University Press, Brill, Bloomsbury, TNT Clark, Moore Zebek, and many other publishers. So he completed his doctoral residency in Oxford in collaboration with the Oxford Centre for Missions Studies and received his Ph.D. from Middlesex University, UK. He has also earned advanced degrees in theology from Acadia University and the Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. At the beginning, Dr. Johnston, can you say something more about your background? What do you do? About your books, projects, anything, please?
It's so important that our faith connects up well with thinking. And the beauty of the Christian faith is that it applies to every aspect of our lives. We're not believing in fairy tales, we're believing in real historical people, places, events. And as a Christian, I wanted to become a Christian thinker. Matthew 22:37, Jesus said the great commandment was to love God with your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind. And there was a time in my life where I felt like I loved Jesus with all my heart, my soul, and my strength, but I needed to love him more with my mind and my thinking. And so for me, that meant going to the intellectual Jerusalem, that is Oxford, and studying in the Sackler Library with original Bible manuscripts. And it was during that formative time in my life that the Holy Spirit clearly impressed upon my heart to start a ministry called Christian Thinkers Society, where our mission would be to equip and inspire Christians to be thinkers and thinkers to be Christian. And so we have done that now for nearly 2 decades, where we train and equip Christians to be better thinkers and hopefully inspire thinkers to follow Jesus. That was certainly the story of my own life. I became my ministry before I ever had one. I delight in the fact that the Christian faith is something that creates lifelong learners. I've not arrived, even though I've enjoyed a wide array of publishing, as you've asked me to share, and speaking in media. I'm still learning. I'm still growing in my faith. This week, I've been studying new aspects of the resurrection in my travels that have fired me up and excited me about how well evidenced our faith is. And so, as a result, I get to have great conversations with other thinkers and scholars like yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnston. Now, my first question for you is basic, but in your book, you listed 7 reasons to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. Could you just please name those reasons?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and I mean there's more than 7 good reasons, but we all have an economy of words when we write books, and I like seven, it's God's number, so I just did 7 reasons. And the first one is that it's the only way we can ultimately make sense of the suffering in our lives. Romans 8:18 says that Paul says that I do not consider the sufferings that I'm going through in this world to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in us. That's Romans 8:18. And so there was something about resurrection that spoke to theodicy, the problem of evil that we all face, suffering, pain. I received news yesterday that a dear friend of mine had tragically died on July 4. We can't make sense of the suffering and pain outside of the resurrection of Jesus. Number two, there are skeptics who believe that Jesus didn't really know what he was talking about. He certainly wasn't God. And we later foisted this deification on him. Well, that's not true when you actually read the Bible. Jesus knew what his mission was, and Jesus promised, he made statements. He definitely predicted that he would die and rise again. That's Mark 8:31, Mark 9:31. Mark 10:33 and 34. And then number three, he adumbrated resurrection. He foreshadowed resurrection by raising other recently dead individuals from death, and he raised them. They literally were stood up, anastasis in Greek. That's what it means. Number four, all of the archaeology and I work in tandem with many archaeologists. All of the archaeology points to the authenticity of the resurrection accounts. Number five, you can explain the redemption of these very critical, hostile people like Saul of Tarsus, like James, outside of the resurrection. Number six, it's not what any of his disciples were expecting. When you look at Matthew 16:22, Peter says, Jesus, don't go to the cross. And Jesus responds and says, get behind me, Satan. I have to go to the cross. I have to die for your sins. And then finally, everywhere the Christian message is embraced, everywhere this message of resurrection is preached, people receive freedom, humanity is rehumanized, marginalized, people feel whole. It brings shalom, peace to the world. And so those are the seven reasons that I get into in Body of Proof. Of course, there's more, but those are the seven I talk about in my book, Body of Proof.
Amazing, and I'm really sorry about your friend. Please accept my
Thank you so
condolences.
much.
Let me ask just one thing. You said that Jesus definitely predicted his death, but what if authors later wrote so that it looks like he predicted his death, but Jesus originally, historically, never said that actually? So, how would you answer on that critique?
Yeah, well, that would be a complete argument from silence. I mean, if we can't trust what the gospel writers wrote about Jesus, we really can't trust anything from antiquity. One of the reasons that I trust the gospel writers is that they include again and again embarrassing details about their lives, to where if you were writing a fanciful narrative, if you and I wanted to invent a religion, we wouldn't invent a religion where John Mark runs away naked from Jesus. Literally, that word "sinden" is used. It's the same term we get shroud from, by the way. We wouldn't invent narrative that is embarrassing, that our leader cut off Malchus's ear, that Peter literally had to be told he was Satan. There's so many embarrassing, revealing gaffes in the narrative of the 89 chapters of the Gospels that if you were making up a narrative, and again, I know made up narratives. I'm an expert in extra canonical Gospels. And these are the Gospels that have Jesus with what's called polymorphic Christology. Jesus is a giant. The angels are giants. The cross is buried in the tomb and the cross speaks. I mean, these are the kind of other records that we have from second and third century Christianity. And so when a skeptic says that, oh, well, how do we know they just didn't make it up? I can show you made up works. I can show you 70 extra canonical gospels, the Proto-Evangelium of James, the Acts of Pilate, the Gospel of Peter, all of these other fanciful works that certainly tell us about second and third century Christianity, but they're not historical. I can show you what made up works look like. All you have to do is read them, and you'll see the vast difference, the sober narrative, the realism of the canonical gospels.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Johnston. Now, could you elaborate more on your quote in book? This is what you said. Society is transformed everywhere Christianity is introduced and embraced. So why is this considered as an argument for Jesus' resurrection, given that other religions also have a positive impact on the people?
Oh, I didn't know they did. So that's news to me. It appears that Christianity is the only religion that makes sense of suffering and that brings people freedom. I've written a book called Unimaginable: What the World Would Be Like Without Christianity, and I've studied this for years. What does the world look like? Well, it turns out that we destroy ourselves without God. We destroy ourselves without Christianity. We destroy ourselves without the message of the resurrection. I was on the phone yesterday with a group in Utah that's rescuing girls that are caught in the slave trade of Mormonism. And by slave trade, I mean these young minors who are being forced into marriage in current day, the state of Utah. And I'm amazed. We send students from our school to minister with the Dream Institute at Shoal Creek. And so even the Made in America cults and religions like Mormonism that encourage polygamy with minors. I mean, that's where I would come right back at you and say, show me a religion that brings people freedom like Christianity. And when I say Christianity, I don't mean Christianity just you can slap a Bible verse. I mean biblical Christianity. And so when we see that this message of the resurrection was preached, it led to all of the social justice missions that did not exist before it, such as coming against infanticide in the early church, rescuing children, rescuing minors, especially education, educating people, helping people truly live their best life in a biblical sense. That's the gift that Christianity is. And I would encourage people that this is a great question you're asking, and I would encourage people that want to know more to take the time to read my book, Unimaginable: What the World Would Be Like Without Christianity, because I spend 80,000 words documenting it with 33 pages of citations, what the world was like before the Christian message of resurrection, what it's been like in the last 70 years when more than one half of the world has turned its back on God, and then the X factor of Jesus in the world, the gift of the resurrection preaching, and that proclamation of Jesus raised up. The impact that made on the world has been and continues to be profound, and it has led to humanity being rehumanized. You don't have hospitals, you don't have education, you don't have charity, you don't have social justice. And I don't mean that in a modernism, I mean that in the last 2,000 years without the preaching of the resurrection. No other religion gave that to the world.
Fine, Dr. Johnston, but honestly, the world existed before Christianity. Humans
Yes.
did not kill themselves or destroy. So that's example that without Christianity, a world would still exist, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But it wouldn't be a good world. It wouldn't be the world that I would want to live in. That's my point. It's an unimaginable world. All you have to do is look at, we tend to destroy ourselves without this teacher from Galilee that said we needed to love our enemies.
Great point. Thank you so much. Now, next, my question is,
Yes.
do you believe that we still have the authentic tomb of Jesus today? If so, which one do you think it is?
Man, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. I do believe that we have the authentic burial place of Jesus because I'm not irrational. The evidence is so good. And I lead tours to the land of Israel. I love the land of Israel. And I especially love the Garden Tomb, but that is not the spot where Jesus rose from the grave. I have a 2,600 word chapter in my book, Body of Proof, where I get into all of the details about Gordon's tomb. That's the 2,000 words. Basically, that tomb is around 800 years too old. So it would have been around for hundreds of years before Jesus of Nazareth died on April 3rd, AD 30. What we do have with the current Church of the Holy Sepulchre, first century burial traditions, and at the current Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is it's a combined it's really a church complex because there's several different, there's elevation to it, and there should be, because Jesus was crucified at Golgotha or Calvary outside of the city. And 150 feet away was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. And the antiquity of that spot goes back to the second century with Hadrian. Hadrian, because of his hatred of the Jews, he decides to demolish the city of Jerusalem. He renames it Aelia Capitolina, and he renames Israel Palestine after the Philistines, the enemies of Israel. And in doing that, he demolishes this ancient venerated site of this dying and rising God, and he puts in a temple dedicated to Jupiter and to Venus. Well, in 325, Constantine's mother, Helena, after the Council of Nicaea, comes to Jerusalem. She hears about this tradition that what becomes the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the very spot where Jesus rose from the grave. And right now it's just been covered up by these pagan deities, these pagan idols, these pagan temples. And she's the one who pays to have this new church erected, which becomes a Byzantine church over the very site. And so the archaeology is outstanding when it comes to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And to answer your question, I do believe we know it's the authentic spot of Jesus's death, crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. You have all of that under the complex. That's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Incredible, but okay, we have Jesus' tomb, but why do you think that Jesus' body was not stolen? considering that this was a very early theory, probably originating as early as the first century?
Well, that's a great question too. Again, I've read all of the critical scholars who believe that Romans left the bodies out to be eaten by dogs. And again, I would refer you to an article by my friend Scott Stripling. You notice I love to cite my sources rather than just make assertions. Um, my friend, archaeologist Scott Stripling, has just written a 40-page article on crucifixion and burial traditions. It is a remarkable article. It simply just underscored everything I already knew in that in peacetime, in non-wartime, in peacetime, especially in the Syrian province, there were 30 Roman provinces in the Syrian province that Pontius Pilate was prefect over. They allowed the Jews to practice Jewish burial traditions, even with crucified victims. We have 5 different buried crucified victims that we have discovered their remains, and several of them are from the land of Israel. 3, one is from Italy and one is from Britain, and so we have 3 different crucifixion victims who were allowed burial. And so that's remarkable when you think about that. One of them is Antigonus, the other is Yehohanan, and we have those remains today. And so we do have records. And again, you have to know something about Jewish burial traditions. Deuteronomy chapter 21 says that the person who is hung on a tree has to be careful, has to be buried before nightfall. We know from the Mishnah that you would bury the crucified individual on the day of their death, and the Sanhedrin would be responsible for that. Jody Magnus, who's an atheist archaeologist at the University of North Carolina, she understands this. She understands Jewish burial traditions, and she says, guess what? The Gospels get it right, meaning that when it says that Jesus' body was removed from the cross, they asked Pilate for the body of Jesus, and then it was buried in this new tomb. Jody says the Gospels get it right. We just simply cannot. These critical, hypercritical scholars like Bart Ehrman and John Dominic Crossan, who believe that Jesus' body was left out and eaten by dogs, they know nothing about Jewish burial traditions in the first century, or if they know it, they've just simply not mentioned it. So I don't know what they know or what they don't know. But again, based on the evidence of Josephus, we have 21 different records of criminals being nailed to the cross. I saw a thinker recently who said that Jesus' body wasn't nailed to the cross. Again, you would have to not read the 21 records we have of criminals being nailed to the cross in the Syrian province of the Roman Empire. So again, I allow the evidence to direct me, not assertions, and that's why I appreciate you bringing me on your program to answer these great questions.
Oh, thank you so much. By the way, I'm in contact with Dr. Stripling that you mentioned, and in a few days we will talk about Shiloh. So he is a great archaeologist. I agree
He
with you. So
is.
thank you.
Well, that's a great
Uh,
site, by the way.
oh yeah. Okay, so Dale Allison said if he were a skeptic, he's not, he's a believer, but if he were, he would say maybe Mary and Peter did not experience bereavement visions of Jesus. What do you think? How would you answer that?
I would go to John chapter 20, verses 1 through 8, where Peter and John find the tomb empty and they see the Sinden, the Athonia, and the Sudarian lying there. And it says they saw and they believed. So I would remind them that Peter believed in the resurrection first, just based on the empty tomb and seeing the burial cloth there before he ever had an experience of seeing Jesus alive. For him to say that Mary did not experience Jesus' resurrection, again, I like Dale. I don't understand it because if we go with the historical records, Mary mistakes Jesus for the gardener at first. Again, a detail we wouldn't put in the text. Like, why is she mistaking him from the gardener? Well, Jesus has been buried in a garden tomb. Maybe it's the garden coming to tend. It's dark. There's no electricity. Jewish men would cover themselves. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons she wouldn't have recognized him. But then when she sees him, she hears his voice. She recognizes it's Jesus. She says Rabboni. So again, I'm not really sure why they have these views because we have to go with the best records. And the best records that we have make it very clear that both Peter and Mary experienced Jesus alive after he had died. And so we have to read these with intellectual honesty.
Okay, it makes sense. So early Christians believed that the end of the world was very near. So if
Right.
they heard that the tomb was empty and that some people were claiming to have visions of the risen Jesus, wouldn't that have sparked religious enthusiasm? Couldn't this explain the origin of the belief that Jesus truly rose from the dead?
No, it really couldn't have because in the first century crucifixion, we are so far removed historically from the anathema that crucifixion was. And yes, there's a lot of religious fervor in the first century, and certainly based on Jesus' Olivet Discourse in Mark 13, they would have thought that perhaps their generation would have been the final generation. But remember, Jesus said only God knows ultimately when these things will happen. So they may have certainly thought that. But to take that and then foist it on the message that this man who's just been absolutely crucified, naked on the cross, and buried in this way that dying this shameful death, you have to understand no one outside of Judaism believed in the resurrection. And so to take that message, both marrying crucifixion, which was so horrible, the Roman Suetonius and Tacitus barely describe what crucifixion was like. The best records that we have that describe crucifixion from antiquity are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are the most descriptive when it comes to what crucifixion was actually like. A lot of thinkers don't realize that our best records for crucifixion from antiquity, as far as how it was practiced, come out of the canonical gospels. And to marry that with this message of resurrection, a body coming back to life that had been decaying in the tomb, that would have come against so many sensitivities in the Roman Empire. I don't think they would have made up that message had it not actually happened.
Well, okay, this seems too easy for you. Let's try with some harder questions.
No,
The
it's
scholar
great questions.
Thank you. Okay, the scholarly consensus holds that the narrative about Nicodemus is fictional since he appears only in the Gospel of John. What is your opinion on this?
No, I totally disagree. And I don't know that I would say the scholarly we have to be careful when we say scholarly consensus this or scholar because man, the consensus of scholarship in the 19th century was that Jesus didn't exist and that Pontius Pilate was made up. And again, Bruno Bauer thought that. He, of course, was really good friends with the Marxist Karl Marx. So again, we have to be careful when we say scholarly consensus. We have to make sure that we always go back to the best sources. And so I don't think things because of secondary sources. I read the primary sources for myself. And so John chapter 3 that explains Nicodemus. Wow. I mean, our earliest fragment of the New Testament is John 17 and 18 that mentions Pilate. Should we not believe Pilate exists because we want to privilege the synoptics over the Johannine narrative? I don't think so. I really don't think so, actually. So I actually haven't heard that much of scholarly consensus saying that Nicodemus is a made-up person, and I probably wouldn't agree with that. I definitely wouldn't.
Okay, fascinating answer. Now, how do you interpret the conversion of Thomas, who is portrayed as a skeptic turned believer? How likely is that this actually happened, as opposed to the author of John simply inventing a story to build upon what Matthew wrote, that some of disciples doubt?
Yeah. Well, Thomas gets a bad rap when in John chapter 11, when Thomas says, well, let's go die with him. Some people think that that's like being very, what's the word, sarcastic. No, Thomas was saying, let's go die with him. Like, hey, if he's going to die, I'm going to go die with him. Like we misread that passage because of an exegetical fallacy. And again, when I think that Thomas wanted to see proof, he wanted to see evidence, that doesn't bother me. I mean, I remind people that the New Testament would not exist unless there was good evidence that Jesus conquered death. There would be no New Testament. They all needed what Thomas needed. We just get a few additional layers of detail that Thomas was missing in action. The first Sunday when Jesus resurrected, we have 11 resurrection appearances in the Gospels and including the book of Acts. And he's not there that first Sunday. I mean, he probably felt bad. Like, he was just missing. He wasn't there. And so he gets his own a resurrection appearance where he literally gets to see the nail prints in the wrists of Jesus. He gets to see the side wound, and then he says, "Ha kurios atheos, my Lord, my God," in Greek. And I think that that is, again, reflective of the fact that we're not getting a made up detail, because we would not make up one of the 12 disciples wavering in their faith like that. We just wouldn't.
All right, thank you again. And similarly to this, in First Corinthians 15 from 3 to 7, we have also only one account that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people. But why don't we have any more report beside this one?
Well, we actually have three people he appears to. I'm not sure who's saying that, but we have three groups and three individuals that he appears to in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8. The larger question, honestly, for me that I want to ask Paul someday is, why didn't you include the women? The one group he does not include in his kirigma are the women. When he says, I want to proclaim to you, I want to give you what I was given, that Jesus died for our sins according to Scripture, that he was buried, and that he rose again on the third day. And that's quoting quoting Hosea from the Old Testament. And then he gives this tradition. He appears to Cephas, he appears to James, he appears to Peter, he appears to the disciples, he appears to the 500. He never mentions that he does the women. So that's a question that I have, actually, of why Paul never mentions the women. Now, having said that, no section of Scripture is taken more seriously by critical scholars, skeptical scholars, than 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the entire chapter.
Amazing. Thank you again, Dr. Johnston. Now, critical scholars would agree that Peter, James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul died for their belief. But beside them, what is with other apostles, how they died? And can we confirm that they really died for their faith, or we don't know simply?
I don't know. It's something that when I have more time, I'd like to do a little more research on. We have these great Christian traditions, but I have a friend who did his Ph.D. because I just recommended him to get a higher academic standing, Sean McDowell. And he's done PhD work on that very question. So he would probably be much better equipped to answer it than me. I simply haven't studied it well enough to give what I think is an answer worthy of your show.
That's really honest. Thank you so much for this. So that's all from me and my questions. So have you any conclusion, Dr. Johnston, about all this we covered? What is the message for people do you want to send,
Oh,
especially for those in Serbia?
well, first, I love Serbian people, and I really appreciate your clear voice for the gospel and your program. And my message for the Serbian people is that the resurrection sets people free, and we have to keep preaching it. We should never add to it, we shouldn't take it away. It's the message that is still powerful. And the only thing outside of God that is said to be powerful in all of the Bible is the gospel. We're told that God is powerful and the gospel is powerful. And there is no gospel without the resurrection. You can't be a Christian if you don't believe Jesus physically, bodily rose from the grave. And so that's what the early church believed and proclaimed. The proclamation of Jesus's teaching became even more the resurrection of Jesus became even more powerful than Jesus' dominical tradition. I want to make that clear. The fact of Jesus's death and resurrection became more powerful than even Jesus's own sermons, his own teaching. That message that Jesus died and rose again, it had traction, it took hold in a world that needed it so desperately, and we need it today. And so my message is keep being faithful to the gospel. We don't need to add to it. We don't need to take away from it. We just need to preach the gospel, and it sets people free. And that gospel is always the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Dr. Johnston, thank you for sharing your insights and scholarship on the resurrection. It's been a powerful and thought-provoking conversation. Dear audience, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the NT podcast. And don't forget, stay faithful, but never stop asking tough questions. So see you in the next episode. Goodbye.